I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to go skinny dipping. Honestly, I always assumed I'd chicken out last minute or at least find some lame excuse to keep my trunks on. But there we were, two adults standing on the edge of this tiny, almost hidden lake in the woods behind my friend Mark's cabin, staring at the water and daring each other in the most ridiculous, half-serious way possible. Mark isn't the kind of guy who pressures you into stuff, but there's this easy confidence about him that makes you want to take chances you usually wouldn't. We'd been friends for a few months, met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and I guess I always thought of him as just another cool guy with a killer smile and a wicked laugh. Turns out he's way more than that, but at this moment, all I really noticed was how the moonlight caught on his skin and made him look like he belonged to some other world, not this quiet, forgotten lake in the middle of nowhere. We'd spent the day hiking, talking about everything and nothing, and somehow the conversation had strayed to this unplanned challenge to strip down and jump in. I was standing there, one foot on a rock, heart pounding more from nerves than the chilly air. Mark just grinned, his eyes sparkling like he knew something I didn't. "Come on, you won't regret it," he said, and honestly, I was already halfway convinced. So I did it, slowly peeled off my clothes, feeling that rush of vulnerability mixed with this weird, freeing excitement. The water was cold, shockingly cold, and as soon as I slipped under, I realized how quiet and still the world had become. No city noise, no distractions, just me and the dark water wrapping around my skin. That's when I felt him. Mark swam up behind me, his arms suddenly around my waist, pulling me close. The water hid his touch but didn't erase the thumping of my heart or the way my breath caught in my throat. I froze for a second, caught between the cold of the lake and the warmth of what was happening. And honestly, I had no idea what was about to come next. I couldn't move for a moment, caught in this strange mix of surprise and something else, something warmer and way more intense than I expected. His arms felt firm but gentle around me, steadying me against the chill of the water. I realized how close we were, how his chest pressed lightly to my back, and all at once, it was like the whole stupid idea of skinny dipping took on a totally different meaning. "Relax," Mark whispered, his voice low enough that it barely disturbed the stillness of the lake. "You're okay." "Yeah," I managed to say, though my voice sounded tighter than I wanted. "I'm fine." But honestly, I wasn't sure if I was fine or just pretending to be. There was a pause, that perfect kind of silence where you can hear your own breath and feel the weight of the moment hanging between you. I wanted to turn around, to look at him and ask what the hell was going on, but every time I tried, my eyes just stayed fixed on the dark water beneath us. "You're cold," he said after a second, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Come here." Without thinking, I leaned back just a little, letting his arms pull me closer. I felt his breath on my neck, the steady beat of his heart against mine, and suddenly, the cold didn't matter at all. It wasn't just the water I was feeling anymore. It was something way deeper, something that had been simmering under the surface since the first time we'd met, but that I hadn't quite dared to name. We floated like that for a minute, just holding on to each other, two silhouettes swallowed by the dark lake. And then, because I guess I was finally ready, I turned around in his arms. He was looking at me like he'd been waiting for that moment, his eyes soft and kind and full of something I wanted to believe in. "I've wanted to do this for a while," he said quietly, like he was confessing a secret. I smiled, a little shaky but genuine. "Me too." What happened next was slow and careful, like we were both trying to figure out a new rhythm. Our lips met, tentative at first, testing the water just like we did when we jumped in. And then, when the kiss deepened, it felt like the whole world shifted, like the night around us faded away, and there was only this connection, this moment, this perfect, electric closeness. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, the moon was higher now, casting silver light over the lake. I rested my forehead against his and laughed softly, still feeling that crazy mix of excitement and disbelief. "You're insane," I said. "Maybe," he grinned, "but a good kind of insane, right?" "Yeah," I said, and honestly, I wasn't sure if I was talking about him or the whole situation. We stayed in the water for a while longer, talking quietly, sharing stories and secrets like the night belonged only to us. I learned that Mark had moved here not too long ago, escaping the noise of the city for something quieter, something real. And the more he talked, the more I saw him. Not just the confident guy who dared me into skinny dipping, but the guy who laughed at his own jokes, who had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world. Eventually, the cold started creeping back in, reminding us we couldn't stay in forever. We climbed out of the lake, dripping and shivering but smiling like idiots, toweling off, wrapped in blankets on the porch, the air cool but not uncomfortable. Mark handed me a cup of hot tea he'd made, and we sat side by side, shoulders touching, the kind of quiet that feels easy, natural. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to convince myself this wasn't some dream or a one-time thing. But the way he looked back, eyes soft and steady, told me this was real. More than real. That night, as I lay in the cabin's tiny bed, I kept replaying everything. The cold water, his arms, the kiss, the way he'd said he'd wanted to do this for a while. And I realized something. Sometimes, the best moments come from just saying yes, from stepping off the edge and trusting that whatever happens next is worth it. I still don't know where this leads, or if we'll keep jumping into things undressed and unafraid, but for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to find out. The next morning, I woke up to the soft hum of birds outside the cabin window and the faint scent of pine mixed with damp earth. I'd slept better than I had in weeks, which honestly surprised me. Probably a leftover effect of the lake, the nervous adrenaline, and maybe the way Mark had held me close before we both finally drifted off. I lay there for a moment, half listening to the forest waking up, half thinking about how strange it felt that one night could shift everything. I was just about to get up when the door creaked open quietly, and Mark poked his head in. His hair was still damp from the lake, eyes a little sleepy but smiling in that easy way that made me feel like I was part of some secret club. "Morning," he said, voice low. "Morning," I answered, sitting up and running a hand through my own messy hair. "Sleep well?" "Like a rock," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. He sat down on the edge of the bed, and for a second, I just looked at him, trying to figure out how to say all the things I felt without sounding like a total idiot. So I started and immediately stopped. Because what even was so right now? How do you talk about the night before without making it awkward? Mark must have read my expression because he gave me a small, reassuring smile. "Look, I know this is weird. Or maybe not weird, but new." "New's a good word for it," I said honestly. He nodded. "I don't want to mess this up. I like you. A lot. But I'm also cool with taking things slow. No pressure. Just us, figuring it out." I felt a weight lift off my chest. It was the kind of honesty that's rare and refreshing, and it made me want to reach out and tell him everything, the doubts, the hopes, all of it. "Yeah," I said, and smiled back. "I like you too. And slow sounds. Good." We spent the morning wandering the woods around the cabin, still in our casual clothes, sometimes brushing hands or bumping shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world. Mark pointed out wildflowers and little birds while I tried to keep up, laughing when I tripped over a root or got tangled in some branches. At one point, we sat on a fallen log, the sun warming our backs, and I realized I didn't want this day to end. It felt like something rare, just two people being themselves, no front, no rush, no expectations. That afternoon, we cooked dinner together in the tiny cabin kitchen. It was nothing fancy, just pasta and some veggies. But there was something about the way we moved around each other, sharing space and tasks, that felt intimate. Mark caught me watching him more than once, and each time he'd grin and say, "You thinking about last night again?" "Maybe," I'd admit, and the smile that spread across his face was like sunshine. Later, after the dishes were done and the sky turned that amazing shade of deep blue, we found ourselves back on the porch, wrapped in blankets with mugs of tea. The world outside had quieted down again, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of leaves. Mark turned to me suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did you ever think about being with a guy before me?" His voice was gentle, curious. I hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. I mean, I'd had crushes, but nothing really serious. You're the first one who made me question everything I thought I knew." He smiled softly. "That's kind of what you did to me too. We stayed like that for a long time. talking about all the things that had felt confusing or scary before, the stuff we'd hidden even from ourselves. It was like peeling back layers, and with every word, every shared secret, I felt closer to him. When the night grew colder, Mark slipped his hand into mine. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, just a quiet, steady connection that somehow said more than words ever could. I squeezed his fingers gently, feeling my heart swell. "We don't have to figure it all out right now," he said. "Just this. Us." Yeah, I agreed, feeling the truth of it settle deep inside me. That weekend, we didn't do much else besides explore the woods, cook, and talk. But every moment built on that first night, like a slow-burning fire that warmed me from the inside out. When it was finally time to leave, driving back to the city felt surreal. The noise, the rush, the constant buzz, it all seemed a little overwhelming after the calm of the lake and the quiet honesty we'd shared. Mark reached over and took my hand as we sat in traffic, fingers entwined like a lifeline. I looked over at him, that same spark in his eyes, and smiled. Whatever this was, wherever it went, I was ready. Because for the first time, being vulnerable didn't feel like a risk. It felt like the start of something real. Back in the city, life moved fast as usual, but something had shifted inside me. The easy confidence Mark had brought into my world over that weekend clung to me like a secret smile. I found myself replaying those moments in the lake, the way his arms had held me, the softness in his eyes, and the quiet honesty that had bubbled up between us like a hidden spring. We didn't rush into anything, which honestly made everything feel more real. Our texts were a mix of casual check-ins and little jokes, but there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something unspoken but understood. One evening, a few days after I got back, Mark invited me over to his apartment for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pizza and bad movies. When I got there, he was waiting at the door with that same goofy grin, and for a second, I almost forgot to breathe. He pulled me inside, and we settled on the couch like we'd done 100 times before. But this time, the space between us felt charged. We were halfway through a terrible action movie when Mark paused it and looked at me seriously. "Can I ask you something kind of weird?" "Shoot," I said, heart already starting to pick up speed. "Do you think this is real? Like, what we've got going on?" I blinked, trying to steady myself. "You mean us?" "Yeah," he said, his voice softer now. "I don't want to mess it up or scare you away." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through my chest. "Mark, I've been thinking about that too. And yeah, I think it's real. At least, I want it to be." He reached out and took my hand, fingers curling around mine. "Me too." That night, we stayed up late just talking, sharing hopes and fears, peeling back not just the layers of who we were, but who we wanted to be. It was scary and exhilarating all at once, like stepping off a cliff and trusting the wind to catch you. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a rhythm that felt natural. We went on lazy Sunday brunches, walked around the city holding hands when no one was looking, and found quiet moments just to be together, whether that meant cooking dinner, sharing playlists, or lying in bed talking about anything and everything until sleep claimed us. But with that growing closeness came moments of vulnerability I hadn't expected. One night, after a particularly long day at work, I was scrolling through my phone when Mark leaned over and asked quietly, "Do you ever get scared?" "Of what?" I asked without looking up. "Of this. Us. How real it is." I put my phone down and looked at him, his eyes searching mine. "Yeah, sometimes. Because it's new. Because it's not what I pictured for myself for a long time." He nodded slowly. "Me too. But I think it's worth it." That admission felt like a weightlifting for both of us. It was the first time we'd really named the fear that had lurked under the surface, and somehow, saying it out loud made it less scary. Our first real date, if you can call it that, was a random Tuesday night. We decided to skip the usual restaurants and instead grab takeout from a food truck in the park. We found a spot under the streetlights and shared everything, from spicy tacos to stories about childhood embarrassments. The night air was cool, and when Mark wrapped his jacket around my shoulders, I felt this surge of protectiveness and something tender I couldn't quite explain. We sat there for hours, just talking, sometimes laughing until our sides hurt, sometimes falling into comfortable silence. At one point, he reached out and brushed a stray hair from my forehead, and I caught my breath. "You're really something, you know that?" he said softly. I smiled, cheeks flushing. "You're making me sound way better than I am." He shook his head. "No, I mean it. You make me want to be better." It was one of those moments that felt like it could change everything, and maybe it did. But life outside our bubble kept pushing in. Work got busy for both of us, and the city's noise sometimes felt overwhelming after the calm of the weekend at the lake. There were days when I'd catch myself caught in old patterns, doubting, overthinking, wondering if I was ready for everything this could mean. One afternoon, Mark surprised me by showing up at my office with a bright red rose and a goofy smile. "Thought you could use a break," he said. We took a walk in a nearby park, away from the honking cars and crowded streets, just like old times. Sitting on a bench, Mark rested his head on my shoulder. "I know it's not always easy," he murmured, "but I'm here, if you want me." I closed my eyes and let that settle in. His presence, his patience, the quiet promise in his voice. "I want you," I whispered back. It wasn't some grand gesture or dramatic confession. It was simple and real, and somehow perfect. Now, when I think back to that night at the lake, to the nervous thrill of skinny dipping and the shock of his arms around me, I realize how much it set everything in motion. Sometimes, the scariest leaps lead to the most beautiful landings. And with Mark by my side, I am finally ready to dive in completely. A few weeks after that park bench moment, things between Mark and me started settling into this crazy, comfortable, new normal. Not the kind of normal where everything is predictable or boring, but the kind where you feel safe enough to be messy and real and still have someone catch you when you fall. We were still learning each other, how we liked our coffee, what made us laugh till we cried, which parts of the city felt like home. And every day, I felt more certain that this was something worth fighting for. One Friday evening, Mark invited me over to his place for what he called a project. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I figured it was some excuse for us to hang out, which I was always up for. When I arrived, he was sprawled on the floor, surrounded by canvases and paint tubes, looking like a kid in a candy store. "I've been meaning to show you this," he said, grinning as he pulled out a half-finished painting of the lake, the one where we'd gone skinny dipping. The moonlight was captured in dabs of silver and blue, and there, in the middle, two shadows swimming side by side. "It's amazing," I said, honestly blown away. "You painted this?" "Yeah," Mark said, cheeks a little flushed. "I've been working on it for a couple of weeks. Thought maybe it'd be a good way to remember that night." I felt something twist in my chest, a mix of pride and this overwhelming sense of connection. "It's beautiful," I told him, "just like that night." He looked up and there was something tender in his gaze that made my heart speed up. "I want to paint more moments like this. With you." The words hung in the air between us, and I realized I was smiling without even trying. I'd like that. The next few hours blurred into a mix of paint-splattered laughter and quiet conversation. We talked about art, music, our families, and the weird little things that made us who we are. At one point, Mark reached over and took my hand, thumb tracing lazy circles over my knuckles. The touch was electric but somehow grounding at the same time. Later, as the night deepened, we found ourselves curled up on the couch, the painting propped against the wall behind us. I rested my head on Mark's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. "I don't do this often," I admitted softly. "Being this open." He squeezed my hand gently. "Me neither. But I'm glad it's with you." That moment, so simple and yet so profound, felt like a turning point. It was the kind of vulnerability that can scare you half to death, but also make you feel more alive than ever. Over the next few days, we kept falling into this rhythm, balancing work stress with stolen moments of joy, navigating the usual ups and downs of building something new. There were times when I caught myself overthinking, worrying if I was moving too fast or not fast enough. But Mark's steady presence always brought me back to center. One Saturday, we decided to revisit the lake. It was early spring now, and while the water was still too cold for swimming, the air smelled fresh, filled with the promise of new beginnings. We packed a small picnic and drove out, the city's noise fading with every mile. When we arrived, the lake was quiet, the surface reflecting the pale blue sky. We sat on the shore, feet dangling in the water, and I felt that same mix of nerves and excitement from our first night there. Mark looked over at me with that familiar spark in his eyes. "Remember when we jumped in, no warning, no hesitation?" I laughed softly. "Yeah, I think I was more terrified than I let on." He grinned. "You were, but you did it anyway." "That night changed everything," I said, watching a ripple spread across the lake. "Sometimes," Mark mused, "the scariest things lead to the best moments." I nodded, feeling the truth of that settle deep inside me. "I'm glad you swam up behind me." He reached out and took my hand, fingers intertwining with mine. "Me too." We stayed there a long time, talking about dreams and fears, about what we wanted from life and from each other. The conversation drifted effortlessly, like the water lapping gently at our toes, and I realized how lucky I was to have this. Someone who saw me, who accepted me, who wanted to dive in with me, no matter how deep the water. As the sun dipped below the trees, casting golden light across the lake, Mark pulled me close. His lips brushed against mine, soft and sure. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise of patience, of understanding, of whatever came next. That night, as we drove back to the city, the world felt a little quieter, a little softer. The noise and chaos hadn't disappeared, but with Mark by my side, I felt ready to face it all. Because sometimes, love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes, it's about two people daring to be vulnerable, to take a chance, and to swim up behind each other when it matters most. In the weeks following our lake night redux, things started to feel more real, in a way I hadn't expected. It was like the initial excitement didn't just fade away. It settled into something steady and warm. I realized I was thinking about Mark more than I had thought possible, and not just when we were together. I caught myself texting him a little too often, replaying conversations in my head, even daydreaming about future plans. It felt both thrilling and terrifying all at once. One Thursday evening, Mark invited me over for dinner again. This time, he was trying out a new recipe, and I could tell he was nervous about whether I'd like it. When I arrived, the apartment smelled like garlic and fresh herbs, and Mark was pacing back and forth in the kitchen, occasionally glancing at the oven. "You nervous?" I asked, dropping my bag by the door. He laughed, a little sheepishly. "Maybe just a bit. I always get weirdly anxious cooking for people I like." I smiled. "Well, lucky me." We sat down with the food, and honestly, it was some of the best pasta I'd had in a long time. As we ate, the conversation drifted from light banter to deeper stuff, the kind of talk you don't usually get to on a first or second date. "So what scares you the most?" Mark asked quietly after a while. I thought about it, swirling the wine in my glass. "Honestly, being vulnerable, letting someone in and risking getting hurt." He nodded, looking right at me. "Yeah, me too. But with you, it feels different. Like, worth it." I reached out and took his hand across the table. "I feel the same." Moments like that made me realize how much trust we were building. It wasn't just butterflies and stolen kisses. It was the slow, careful work of opening up and accepting someone else into your world. A few days later, I found myself at his place again, this time to help with his latest painting project. He had the canvas set up in the living room, and the painting was unfolding slowly, a vibrant cityscape, dark skies lit by neon signs. I watched as he mixed colors and made precise brushstrokes, his face serious but relaxed. "You're really talented," I said, genuinely impressed. He shrugged, but there was pride in his eyes. "Thanks. It's how I make sense of things." I sat beside him on the floor, watching the city grow on the canvas. "So, what's this one about?" Mark paused, brush in midair. "It's kind of about leaving the noise behind, but also carrying it with you. Like no matter where you go, a part of the chaos stays inside." I thought about the lake, the city, the noise, and the quiet, and how Mark seemed to straddle both worlds so effortlessly. "Sounds like us," he grinned. "Exactly." That night, we talked late into the evening about our pasts, the stuff we rarely shared with anyone else. Mark told me about growing up in a small town where being himself wasn't always easy, and how art became his refuge. I shared some of my own struggles, work pressures, family expectations, the long road to accepting who I really was. Sitting there, surrounded by half-finished paintings and the soft glow of the lamp, it felt like we were knitting together pieces of ourselves, creating something stronger than we'd had before. One evening, as spring edged closer to summer, Mark surprised me with tickets to a small concert, a local band playing at a tiny venue downtown. We squeezed into the packed room, the air thick with energy, and the smell of beer and sweat. Standing close together, his arm around my waist, I felt safe and alive all at once. When the band played a song about taking chances, Mark leaned in and whispered, "I'm glad you jumped in with me that night." I smiled, heart full. Me too. After the concert, we wandered the streets, just talking, the kind of deep conversation that flows naturally when you're comfortable with someone. At one point, Mark stopped and looked at me in the glow of a street lamp. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything. Where do you see this going? Us, I mean." I hesitated, heart pounding. "I don't know exactly, but I want to find out with you." He smiled, relief and hope shining in his eyes. "Me too." Those words felt like a promise, not just to each other, but to ourselves, that however uncertain the future, we were choosing to face it together. In the weeks that followed, we kept building on that foundation, navigating the usual relationship hurdles, but always coming back to the simple truth of us. There were tough days, no doubt. Moments of doubt, misunderstandings, moments when the past crept in to remind me how far I'd come. But through it all, Mark was steady, patient, real. One night, after a long day, we ended up back at the lake, this time with a blanket and a thermos of coffee. We sat close, watching the stars blink awake overhead. "I'm scared sometimes," I admitted quietly. "Me too," he said, squeezing my hand. "But that's what makes it worth it." I leaned my head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I'm glad you swam up behind me," he smiled, and we stayed there in the dark, wrapped in each other in the quiet promise of whatever was to come. That night by the lake, wrapped in the quiet and the soft weight of Mark's presence beside me, I finally felt a kind of peace I hadn't known before. It wasn't some fireworks or earth-shattering revelation, just a steady, simple truth settling in my chest. This was where I belonged, right here with him. We sat there for a long time, not saying much, just listening to the gentle lap of water and the whisper of the wind through the trees. I traced lazy circles on the back of his hand, and he leaned his head against mine like we'd done 100 times before. But this time, it felt different, like a quiet promise we were both ready to keep. "I've been thinking about that night," I said finally, voice soft, "how you just swam up behind me when I least expected it." He smiled, eyes reflecting the stars above. "Yeah? Yeah, it kind of feels like how you came into my life. Not loud or sudden, but steady. Like you were there all along, just waiting for me to notice." Mark's fingers tightened around mine. "I was, and I'm not going anywhere." I smiled, feeling warmth spread from my hand up through my whole body. "Neither am I." There was no need for big declarations or dramatic promises. The way we fit together, the way we'd built this thing from nervous laughter and shy glances into something real, that was enough. It wasn't perfect, and probably never would be, but it was honest, and that made all the difference. As we packed up to leave, I took one last look at the lake, the still water mirroring the sky, calm and endless. I realized how much I'd changed since that first dip, how much I'd grown just by letting myself be vulnerable, by taking a chance. Mark slipped his arm around my waist as we walked back to the car, the night cool but somehow lighter, like the weight of fear had lifted. I felt ready for whatever came next, with him. Sometimes I think the best moments in life happen when you stop overthinking and just jump in. And sometimes the best feeling is knowing someone's right there behind you, ready to catch you if you fall. That's what this is. This quiet, steady kind of love that feels like home. And honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way.